You know, aviation is built on details. Probably most Americans aren't aware that Ukraine did support us at that time. You know that we had been attacked. What Ukraine is doing right now is absolutely stunning. It will be hard for Ukraine. Some number of F-16s can destroy anything on the battlefield. I am hopeful that that becomes a devastating fact for the occupying force. The public are going to see is no F-16s, no F-16s, no F-16s, and then all of a sudden there's F-16s everywhere.
Please tell a little bit about your military career and your background.
My background is an F-16 pilot. I flew F-16s from about 1998 until around 2017. Now I'm retired. I'm a full-time traveler and a volunteer. In the last 2 years, volunteering extensively in and around Ukraine.
So which missions did you fly back in the day?
There's kind of two halves. The first half, I was in the active duty Air Force, and I was stationed in operational units. I was stationed overseas, both in Asia and Europe. So my job was to be a frontline, if you will, fighter pilot in the F-16, and I did that for about 10 years. I left the active duty Air Force and went to the National Guard, but it was really just a change in paperwork. I still flew F-16s every day. And in that role, I was in a training unit. So we would take both experienced pilots from non-F-16 aircraft and inexperienced pilots that just came out of flight school and teach them to fly the F-16 and teach them to fight in the F-16. So I did that for about 10 years. And then, like I said, retired about 6 years ago.
Did you teach American pilots or foreign pilots?
I only taught Americans, so I don't have a lot of direct experience teaching foreign pilots. I've worked with a lot of foreign pilots. I flew all over the world and in exercises and in combat with international partners. So I have a lot of experience there, but no, I never taught foreign pilots or pilots that were new to speaking English, essentially.
So how did you start helping Ukraine?
Trevor is a longtime friend. We were at our first assignment in the Air Force, definitely in the last century. We were, young lieutenants together. So I've known him for many years. We've been close friends the whole time. Anyway, he was in Ukraine in around 2018. So I was just actually leaving the Air Force, and he was still in the Air Force, and he was there assisting with an exercise where he got to know a lot of Ukrainians personally and met a lot of pilots and actually cadets as well. And so at that time, he got me interested in Ukraine and in their story, and I just became very fascinated with your country and really the struggle for freedom, which is very compelling to me, and it was compelling at that time, and of course it's even more compelling now that this struggle has become an all-out war due to the invasion. So that's most of the backstory. There's just a little more to it that I would love to share, which is when I was flying in Iraq it would have been about 2003. So this was about a year after the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Patrolling the skies and just really helping troops on the ground, I got a call that there was a unit in trouble. A coalition partner in trouble, and they were actually their position was in danger, so they were leaving their position inside of this small town on the Euphrates River, I believe. And anyway, so I showed up and got in contact with with these troops, or at least the intermediary, the ground controller, and it turns out they're Ukrainians. So there was probably a company of Ukrainians, and at the time that I found them, they were actually already in their armored vehicles, their armored personnel carriers, and they were exfilling out of this area. And I didn't really do much for them. I wasn't able to help them much, but they got out okay, and I just sort of tracked them through this, and I remember seeing their vehicles, and they were a very different color than than most of the vehicles there. The U.S. vehicles were normally painted in a desert color, and some vehicles would have been forest green from Europe, and these were like battleship gray. They actually looked like little battleships driving through the desert. But so that was my an experience with Ukrainians and the Ukrainian military, and probably most Americans aren't aware that Ukraine did support us at that time. That we had been attacked by a foreign enemy, and there was Ukraine with plenty of their own problems at the time. It's 2003, and they were all the way into Iraq supporting the U.S. effort there. So that was actually my first experience with Ukraine, and it was much later that I came to understand some of your story, and the protests in 2013 and 2014, and then of course the invasion of Crimea.
Wow, this is really interesting. So for the first time you went to Ukraine in 2022. How did that happen?
So I happened to not be employed at the time, and so I was just traveling and enjoying my retirement. I had no sort of nothing tying me down, and really my intention, if you would have asked me in December of 21, what would my year look like? At some point, I had hoped to travel to Ukraine, just as another stupid American tourist, hopefully with my friend Trevor, who had gotten me interested in the country. And so then, as you can imagine, when the full-scale invasion occurred, I felt very compelled to do something to help, because I had the means and the freedom and the autonomy. And so I just started looking for volunteer opportunities, and you can imagine it, it was just chaos at the time. And so it took me about a month or so to find an organization that I could go there with. I didn't want to just show up, and sort of become part of the problem, just be another sort of mouth to feed. So I found an organization that was doing humanitarian work in Poland and Ukraine, and I went there with them and spent about a month in Poland, sort of supporting their effort, and then that led to other volunteer opportunities. So the bottom line is I spent from about May until December in Poland, in Moldova, a little bit in Ukraine. So then I came back to the U.S. for a couple months just to reconstitute, and then that's when I got more in 23. I became more closely involved with Trevor's efforts. So we started doing more, and we'd done a little of this in the first year, but some non-lethal aid to the military. So it actually started with him visiting a pilot who had been wounded, or it might have been a navigator who had wounded, but an aviator who had been wounded in the line of duty. And so he was visited this guy, and he saw he was in a very makeshift medical facility, the best they could do, and so he asked him for some medical supplies, and I happened to know people that were doing medical aid in Western Ukraine, so I was able to connect them and eventually deliver some supplies, and this turned into and Trevor just asked, "What else do you need? What can we do for you?" Just a couple of guys, operating on their own, freelancing, if you will. They said, "Well, we need flight suits because the Ukrainian Air Force was not fully geared with like modern protective fabrics. So these, a Western pilot, a NATO pilot, will when he steps out to his aircraft, he's wearing thousands and thousands of dollars of gear, especially in cold weather. These are specially created synthetic fibers. They're long chain molecules, blah 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 blah. But some of these flight suits even contain Kevlar. The same thing in body armor and bulletproof clothing. In any case, so we realized that thousands and thousands of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars of high quality, life-saving, fire-resistant fabrics are sitting around in closets all over the U.S. and Europe. All these retired pilots like me that you generally don't turn all this gear back in, and so we started an effort. And again, like Trevor's the lead on this. I was just his lovely assistant or whatever, and but we would collect donated gear, and we use social media, and we use this sort of network of friends and brothers of pilots that we have all over the world, and leverage that and collect it, and I'll let him share the numbers because they're very compelling, but we think we provided some high quality clothing, protective clothing, life-saving gear to a pretty good percentage of the Ukrainian Air Force and air activity.
So how is it working? How are you reaching out to people to ask them to donate their equipment?
We're very annoying. That's the number one thing. So it's the modern age. Social media is a big thing. Twitter and LinkedIn, and so connecting with military groups there, and of course there's a lot of friends and former colleagues, and it's a network, right? So there's global support for Ukraine. People all over the world are some are interested, some are deeply invested, but I think a lot of Americans and our NATO partners, we really feel compelled to help if we can, because we recognize this, the struggle for freedom and autonomy and democracy and human rights. I mean, these are all values that we hold dear, and the realization that Ukraine as a nation made a very deliberate choice to orient towards those values and orient towards the West is very compelling. So it's really just about activating small networks. So sort of once we are able to find somebody who's enthusiastic, who's especially if they're active flyers, but even if in groups of retirees and friends, and the guys keep in contact after they leave the service. So they just come from all over, and then we just use U.S. mail, and we would sort of mail them all to friends that are in Europe, and collect them there. So I've worked in Europe as both when I was in the Air Force, and then later as a defense contractor. So I have some friends that are there, and so they're able to help and just provide us with kind of a staging area, their house. So we would collect all these flight suits and jackets and gloves and socks and underwear. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. Ukraine is cold in the winter, so the clothing adds up and the gear adds up, and we collect all these and sort them and actually allocate them to individual aviators. So we would not necessarily by name, but we would get the sizes because there's no extra. If you went into a supply, the supply function at a U.S. Air Force base, there's all this extra gear. They have all the sizes they need, but that's not the case in Ukraine. So we would match each size, height, and chest size, and to individual flyers, to individual aviators. And we also started working with rescue personnel, and we've started working a little bit with firefighters as well, because they all need the best gear possible. So our objective is to whatever equipment and whatever gear that we can, clothing that we can provide, we'll provide, because it can save a life. These guys are they're in combat every day. They're flying much more dangerous missions than I ever flew in my career. So to be able to provide them with something that could save them save them from injury or save them from dying in an ejection or in an accident is it's an honor to do, really.
Please tell a little bit about one of your trips last year when you met Ukrainian kids who aspired to become pilots one day.
No, yeah, I would love to. It was, you know, for me personally, it was just really a breath of fresh air. You know, spent a lot of time traveling to, you know, military units, Air Force bases, like austere locations, you know, field locations, and you know, you see the struggle of these aviators and their support personnel and their technicians, and they're in danger on the ground, they're in danger in the air. I mean, and you know, the war is, and I never went to the front. I was never in more danger than any Ukrainian sort of walking down the street. But anyway, after months of this, we had an opportunity to visit a aviation centered academy, I guess is the best word. And you know, these are I think the youngest child was 10 or 12, you know, and then they all the way through sort of what, you know, in the US we'd call high school. So, you know, 17, 18-year-old. And so this is an amazing facility. They have all these, you know, these classrooms with, you know, model aircraft and robots and rockets, you know, model rockets working, you know, working models, and they have full-scale simulators, and it was just really mind-blowing that this facility and these instructors, you know, they have you know, pilots and non-pilots, you know, and teachers, you know, science teachers, and it was just absolutely amazing. This was in Kyiv. So we got there. Juice's mom was there. So she was actually there doing a whole presentation and talking about Juice and his work. And so it really worked out wonderfully that we could be there, you know, two retired US Air Force guys, and you know me being a former F-16 pilot. And so we got to talk to these young people and listen to their stories, and they asked to hear my stories, which is ridiculous because they're not very good, but so yeah, they were amazing. I mean, this you know, this one young man, I've got this incredible photo. You know, I don't know, he might be 12, and he climbs in a full-scale MiG-21 simulator and just flies the heck out of this thing. You know, takes off, just rocketing around, and then you know, just lands it flawlessly. And you know, and after this, you know, they want, well, you need to get in the MiG-21 simulator. I'm like, okay. And you know, so I actually felt like I was in a lot of pressure to not crash this thing because this 12-year-old boy just managed to fly it flawlessly. But like, all these young people, like, and you know, these young women that are so excited to enter aviation and to become pilots and navigators and scientists and engineers. And you know, I met one young man that, you know, we sort of share a name, is, you know, is Petro, and you know, he's like, yeah, flying's cool, but I want to be an engineer. I think it's more important to build the aircraft. Like, those guys are amazing. I'm like, I 100% agree with you. Like, these machines are incredible. And, you know, you know, for a young person to see himself building the aircraft of the future was deeply inspiring. So these kids were amazing. And it really, like, I was in Ukraine for months, and it was by far the best experience I had there, you know. So yeah, really inspiring.
So for how long did you stay in Ukraine?
I was there about 2 months in 2022, like physically in Ukraine, and then this past year in 23, I was there for about 4 months total. You know, we did the flight suits, the deliveries, and of course, I got to know a lot of aviators and pilots doing that. So I was actually able to do a few things. I can't speak too specifically, but try to help in very small ways with the transition F-16s, maybe just as an advisor, I guess is the best way to say it. And then I've I spent some time engaging with Ukrainian pilots and helping them just answer questions, helping with English, because aviation English is its own language, right? And there's very specific ways to communicate in aviation, and the terminology is not common. So I kind of found a little niche there where I could help Ukrainian pilots who had questions, and so that spent a lot of time doing that. Just a little bit in person, but mostly online, and speaking to these guys online. And
so you have been in touch with Ukrainian pilots for some time now, and you heard them talking about F-16s for a long time. What do you think the main challenges for them are right now? What do you think about the mood? How do they feel, in your opinion? Because you know what it takes to learn to fly those jets, and also you taught them.
the good news is when I first started meeting these guys, primarily in the middle of last year, in the last summer, and F-16s was just an idea, that there had been no formal announcement. Everybody was waiting for this sort of political requirements to be met. So there was a lot of frustration, as you can imagine, and skepticism. This will never happen, and all that is, of course, very understandable. A lot of questions, of course, but it was a faraway thing. And then after the announcement came that this was going to happen, and the NATO partners started to sort of build a coalition of countries that would be a part of this. Poland, Romania, Norway, Belgium, Denmark. The enthusiasm increased, but then also the reality of this is a whole new. And it's not just a different aircraft, right? It's a whole different mindset. These aircraft are amazing machines, certainly, but they do their best work when they're working together with other aircraft and with ground stations, and with radars, and it's a whole ecosystem, if you will, of technology. And it's kind of like your phone. Like you take your phone and you disconnect it from the internet, and now it's just a really nice calculator, and maybe you've got some videos saved on there. But to really leverage the capability of the F-16, which is a weapon system, it's not just an aircraft, and you need it to be part of this whole ecosystem. And so I think the reality of what's in front of the Ukrainian military sort of dawned on these Ukrainian pilots, and they understand, like, it's a very long road to climb, but they're doing it, and I've met with I've talked with a lot of pilots. Some are currently in training, in English training. Some are in more like in flight training in NATO countries, and they're getting there. They're still, the reality is there's a long way to go, because it's the Western way of warfare is very different than the Soviet way of warfare, and that transition has been ongoing for the Ukrainian military for a long time. This is well documented, right? Like, and some very brilliant people have talked about this, and so that process for the air forces, for the Ukrainian Air Force is ongoing, and it's a big challenge. It's a challenge to make the physical infrastructure ready for F-16s and for Western aircraft. It's a challenge to train technicians and maintenance personnel and supply personnel, and there's a million details in aviation, and aviation is built on details, and it takes people say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it definitely takes a village to raise an airplane, and to get an airplane off the ground takes this huge effort of hundreds of very skilled and well-trained people. So all of those things are happening right now, and you asked the question, what is that like? I have no idea what that's like. The United States hasn't fought, the United States hasn't sort of fought with our backs against the wall since, maybe World War II, but, even in the Second World War, we sort of had the safety of America, relative safety of America to train and arm and produce, both equipment and trained people. So what Ukraine is doing right now is absolutely stunning. What you have accomplished as a nation of being able to sort of hold the line while you continue to learn and innovate and generate new capabilities we don't even have in the West. That what you've done with both airborne drones and naval drones, and it's really stunning. For the individual pilots, it's tough. They're humans, they're people, right? They need rest, they need time off, and so what you're asking them to do is, with every waking moment that they're not actively engaged in combat operations, what you should be doing is sleeping and resting when you're not actively engaged in combat operations. And what we're asking them to do is relearn their entire job in a new language, in new equipment, and even with new tactics. So that is a huge burden for the current aviators, and it's a long road, and they're doing it. And I'm deeply, deeply impressed by them. Deeply, I deeply admire them. I admire their courage. And I just can't say it enough. Like it's what I tell friends is, in the U.S. Air Force, like if the cappuccino machine is busted, I mean, we might not fly, right? Like it's, we're like, if there's no coffee, like I don't know if this, this day is going to happen. And these guys are taking off in the middle of a rocket attack, of a cruise missile attack, and going out to fight. So it's really, really impressive what they've accomplished and what they are accomplishing.
So when do you think those F-16s will be in Ukraine, ready to help on the battlefield and fight Russian aggression?
This, of course, is a wild guess, but I think you will see that in this year, in 24. I know that means it could be 11 months from now, but if I was guessing, I think what we as the public, and I am part of the public here. I'm not privy to any special information, but I think you will see nothing happening sort of in the public eye, and then all of a sudden everything will happen, right? And so what's going on right now is 100,000 small decisions. Hundreds of technicians are training and pilots are training, and physical airfields are being repaired and upgraded, and there's so many little details, like where do you put the weapons, because U.S. weapons are, they're stored differently, right? They're a lot of them have computers in them, and they need a certain kind of care and feeding. Excuse me. So what we as the public are going to see is no F-16s, no F-16s, no F-16s, and then all of a sudden there's F-16s everywhere. How many you're going to see and what their exact effect on the battlefield, I don't know. That there's so much work to do, and there's a lot of decisions to be made, right? So what you do with these aircraft matters, and when you fly them, and how it's a multi-role aircraft. It can do air to air, it can do air to ground, it can do everything. I got to do everything sort of in the fighter world when I was flying this thing. Now, well, but I did it. The choice of how to use these aircraft and where to use them, the choices about how to protect them when they're not in use, you can imagine that's very much on the minds of commanders and planners. So all of those choices will affect what we as the public perceive. But what I think is important to appreciate is West has invested heavily in what I can call long-range precision strike. So, you know, that right now the U.S. Air Force could conceivably destroy anything anywhere on the planet within about 48 hours. Um, and that's kind of should be like a terrifying revelation, but also a comforting revelation that, you know, that I do think America is a force for good in the world. And, you know, so if you take that technology and that idea, and then you place it over Ukraine, with the right tactics and the right weapons and the right support, you know, some number of F-16s can destroy anything on the battlefield. And that's a big deal when you have an enemy who has dug himself in, right? So, you know, we know that what's happening is an infantry on infantry and armor on armor war. That's a lot of trench warfare. The lines have not moved appreciably, you know, in about a year and a half, really, since last, you know, the summer before last was, you know, then the last major move was in September of 22. And, you know, when enemy forces, the occupying forces were pushed back a ways. So if you think about the effect of long-range precision strike on enemy forces, you know, I like to look at things from the perspective of the enemy. There is nowhere in Ukraine that they are safe, that they will be safe for more than about 24 to 36 hours. You know, however long it takes to locate an enemy target or an enemy position of importance, and assign, you know, an aircraft and a weapon to it, and that thing's gone. And of course, it takes more than that. There are defenses, and there's a lot more going on, but that's not a capability that the Ukrainian Air Force has had, you know, especially in mass. So if you're starting to talk about being able to do that several times a day, there's nowhere safe for the occupying forces. And so they can't stay in one place. They have to move. Well, they're in a trench, right? Like they're literally entrenched. So they can't move forward because the Ukrainian military is in the way. And they can't move, you know, it doesn't help them much to move laterally. So really their only option is to leave. So that I am hopeful that becomes a devastating fact for the occupying force. The fact that they will not be safe in any one place for more than a day is a big deal, and it becomes very difficult to operate a fixed defense in that situation. I mean, you know, the reason we don't have castles anymore, and it isn't because we don't love castles and princes and princesses. It's because somebody invented artillery, and it turns out if you can demolish a fixed structure with an artillery shell, then it's not much point in having fixed structure. And when you start talk about air power, nothing that is sitting in one place can survive if it's important. So that will have a huge impact on the war when all those pieces are in place, and it's more than just an aircraft and a pilot, but when all those pieces are in place, the effect will be significant for the occupying force.
So what about Russian air defense? Some experts say that it is so strong that F-16s won't be as effective as they could have been. What's your take on it?
That statement is true. It will be hard for Ukraine. You know, that the defenses are good, right? The Russian equipment in general is impressive stuff, at least on paper. And you know, we've seen that in the real world, like maybe they're not always honest. This is crazy, but maybe Russians aren't always honest about like things. And one of the things they're not honest about is the capabilities of their weapon systems, right? So so there are certainly some vulnerabilities there, but it's important to understand, you know, we like to think of, we like to boil, you know, a complex problem down to something we understand. And we like to think of an air war or an air engagement as a boxing match, right? Like, okay, in this corner, the F-16, he weighs 20,000 pounds, and he's got these weapons, and in this corner, the Su-35, and he weighs 40,000 pounds, and he has these weapons, and okay, ready, fight, right? And there's a referee, and there's a ring, and there's rules, and the reality in warfare, and really all warfare, but certainly in modern warfare, is it's not two guys fighting, mano a mano with a referee, and it's not one aircraft, and okay, they're gonna have a great time. And we certainly practice that in the air, and it's huge fun, but it's more like a fight in a bar, where you've got all these sort of forces and actors, and not a lot of information and a lot of bad information, and it's kind of chaos, right? It's controlled chaos. And so in a bar fight, it doesn't matter if you're the biggest, toughest guy or girl, because that somebody can hit you over the back of the head with a bottle of vodka, and you're done. And so modern warfare is a little bit more like that. Like it certainly matters if you have an equipment advantage, which the Russians do now. They have more modern aircraft at the moment than the Ukrainian Air Force. They have more modern, I don't know if they have more modern defenses, but they certainly have more defenses, right? They have numerically more. What actually occurs in the air war depends not just on measuring F-16 versus Sukhoi, whatever. It's the total capability of one force versus the total capability of the other force. And that includes their tactics and their operational doctrine, and their ability to work really as a team and employ teamwork against an enemy. So it's not as simple as their missile is better than our missile, or our missile is better than their missile. And sort of for the general public, what I can say is that F-16s will be an upgrade, right? So they don't have, each aircraft that Ukraine receives doesn't have to be better than each aircraft that the enemy has. Each aircraft that Ukraine receives adds to their capability, right? So if the Russians were so good, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this. This would have been over a long time ago. So as we add F-16s into this whole into the capability of the Ukrainian military writ large, you will see a net positive effect. And it doesn't mean that Ukraine will establish air, you hear about air superiority. Doesn't mean like 5 F-16s are going to establish air superiority over, 100,000 square kilometers of airspace. They don't need to have an effect on the battlefield. They don't need to even necessarily go into a high threat environment to have an effect on the battlefield. So, our Western way of war means we have to have air superiority. It's part of our doctrine, and you've seen this on the ground, like, even the way that you see this in the news, the way that the Western powers have trained a lot of Ukrainian ground forces was problematic this past year, because it's based on air superiority, right? NATO ground forces don't even think that much about air attack. They just assume that the Air Force and their ground-based air defenses will take care of the problem. And that of course is not the case in Ukraine. So, but these Western aircraft and Western weapons are going to add to what Ukraine is doing, and a great example of that is Ukrainian pilots are already shooting Western weapons. They're dropping Western bombs. This is open source. This is in the news, and I can tell you definitively that employing these weapons from MiG-29s and Su-27s, that are not upgraded, that are in the same, have the same hardware and software that they did 30 years ago. That is very difficult. Like what these pilots are doing with their current aircraft with Western weapons is extremely difficult, way more difficult than anything I ever had to do. So when you replace those aircraft with F-16s, or really you're not even replacing them, you're adding F-16s. It's just easier, and because it's easier, you can drop, you can send more weapons at the enemy more quickly, more precisely, and each one of those weapons will have a higher probability of doing its job of destroying its target.
So speaking about those F-16s that Ukraine is actually getting, those are, some say that those are Block 10 to 20, which means it's not the latest version of this jet. Do you think those will be still effective on the battlefield?
They are going to have some limitations, right? The hardware, some of the hardware is old, but some of the hardware is brand new. And what's important to appreciate is these NATO partners, these European partners that bought F-16s many, many years ago, have done an exceedingly good job of keeping them up to date. So they share, they have the same computers as modern F-16s, as brand new F-16s, probably. But certainly they have as good a technology in them as the F-16s that the United States is operating. So they are much more capable than you would believe them to be, given that they were produced in the early 1980s. All the important stuff is new, and that makes a big difference, because in modern warfare, just like in modern life, the software matters. The hardware matters, the software matters, the computers matter, the network matters. Those things are very important, and those things are up to date. So a big thank you really to these NATO partners that are donating or sending these F-16s, because they've done a really good job of keeping it up to date.
So because you spend so much time in Ukraine on those humanitarian missions, but also you are such a skilled F-16 pilot, so I just have to ask you, if there was this opportunity to, help protect Ukrainian sky flying those jets, would you do this? Because, some retired pilots like Dan Hampton are offering this. What do you think about that?
Yeah, consider absolutely. Would I do it? I don't know. I want to. The best answer I can give is if that opportunity occurs and I have sought it out, I hope I would have the courage of Ukrainian pilots, because what they are doing is far more dangerous than anything I ever had to do. Far more dangerous and difficult. I was used to fighting and flying with this massive, war machine at my back, and having all of the information. I know where all the problems are. I just have to solve them, so I hope that I would have the courage of Ukrainian pilots, who are half my age, by the way. I mean, these guys are like, yeah. I mean, I talk to guys, when we talk about how long they've been flying and their hours, and these guys, half of their, more than half of they're in their early 20s, and more than half of their flight time is in combat. It's mind blowing. So they do inspire me, and I think it's honestly, I think it's unlikely that you'll see foreign pilots flying F-16s. I would do it. I think I would love the opportunity. I'd love to help out in any way I can. But it's when there's a lot of foreign fighters in Ukraine, but a fighter jet has an enormous amount of combat power and an enormous reach, right? Like you're talking like hundreds of kilometers that this thing can go, and you're launching weapons that can go many, many kilometers, much less the aircraft. So it's a very big decision. It's a much bigger decision for the Ukrainian government to put that combat power in the hands of a foreign pilot. That's a different decision than handing somebody a firearm, and gearing them up and sending them to the front as a soldier.